The Adeptus Ministorum has spent millennia spinning magnificent golden lies about the nature of the flame. They preach of the Ignis Sanctus, the purging righteous fire of the God Emperor that burns away the heretic, the mutant, and the Xenos, leaving the soul cleansed and the Imperium pure. They paint it as a beautiful light, providing comfort and warmth. But those of us who have been on the receiving end of flame know all too well the true nature of fire. It is a gluttonous, unthinking beast. Fire does not care for the pedigree or the royalty of those in its way, nor does it pause to read the irreplaceable secrets of a lost age set in sacred vellum before it curls them back into brittle flakes. Yet, dearest listeners, as I sit within my spire, around me drifts the choking grey snow of 10,000 years of human history, the ashes of a workload of 100 generations of scribes, cartographers and remembrancers coating my still trembling fingers. I peer over the shattered parapet of my desk, looking down to the yawning silence abyss of the lower archives. Where once stood vaulting columns of the recorded truths and lies of the Imperium, there is only a smouldering canyon of blackened stone and ruinous detritus. In this quiet devastation, I find no solace in the prayers of the Synod. I find no warmth in the Imperial Creed. This fire was not the Emperor's righteous fury. It was a targeted murder of knowledge. The lowest sanctum held forbidden secrets, whispers of warped madness, Xenos cruelty and the seductive calls of chaos. Thanks to the lost records were merely copies of copies, and no permanent scar was carved into the Imperium's grand memory. Yet despite this small mercy, my spirit remains shattered after seeing those hungry flames lapping greedily at the ancient stonework of my spire. A profound sense of absolute helplessness, a crushing weight that no simple vocabulary of the Gothic tongue can truly hope to describe, has settled deep within my chest. As I look out over the smoking ruins of my life work, feeling entirely exposed to a hostile universe that truly cares nothing for our preservation. Among the low-ranking scribes and the tech adepts who tend to the lower levels, frantic whisperings have circulated regarding the possible cause, with some speculating that a poorly maintained air purification unit might have cast a single fatal spark into the dry ancient stacks of forgotten lore inscribed in scrolls still unread. While others suggest that one of our lobotomized servitors may have suffered a catastrophic neural collapse, its organic brain matter finally rotting away under the strain of its endless duties and driving its claws blindly through the parchment, with a tragic frenzy before the fire consumed both machine and history alike. However, the omnipresent and ever-watchful gaze of the Holy Inquisition have been monitoring my sanctum from the spires for some time, and their ruthless agents were swift to discern the precise origin of this tragedy amidst the smouldering heaps of partially melted data slates and cindering records. Their grim analysis revealed that the conflagration was no mere accident of failing machinery, but rather a calculated, deliberate strike targeting our most guarded accounts of the Tyranid threat. These texts detailed their incomprehensible origins, grotesque biology, and the suffocating terror of the shadow in the warp. It was this subsequent and typically aggressive investigation by the Ordo that unearthed the truth far more sickening than the loss of any historical text, revealing a secret so deeply buried that even I, with all my decades spent deciphering the most restricted archives of this sector, had never seen referenced or even whispered of in any of the secured tomes in my possession. They uncovered evidence of a hidden tumour festering within the very populace of our world, a malformed sect of humanity whose flesh and minds have been subtly morphed and mutated into a grotesque hybridity, transforming them into something utterly alien and masquerades in our own image, and waits in the dark for their star-spanning masters. Aboard the alien fleets and dark gods that threaten to tear our great Imperium asunder, the realization that our own bloodline can be so foully subverted, acting as a beacon for the Great Devourer from within our own worlds. It is by far the most chilling revelation I've ever had the misfortune to discover. And so, if your attendance has been marked and the machine spirit of your boxcast has been appeased, I shall present my next penned work, The Foulness of the Unholy Trinity. Those born of the Xenos, mutated by the Xenos, and heretical in their worship of the Xenos. The revelations of the Genestealer Cults. to even attempt to understand these blasphemous creatures. For no longer would they be deemed fit to be labelled anything closely human. One must have an overview of the Tyranids themselves. Though much of the subject is now scorched, my contacts within the serfs of the Blood Ravens have once again borne fruit to replace much of what was lost, and a full record will in due time be made of the Tyranids themselves, but I will attempt to summarise with what little remains. The Tyranids are extragalactic, coming from beyond the borders of the known galaxy itself, launching their invasion originally from the galactic east, before surrounding and even circumventing the galactic plane, launching their tendrils from below to reach the heart of our Imperium. They are a biological infestation even above that of the fungal infection of the greenskins. This species possess no soul as we understand it, nor do they seek empire, wealth, or the cruel pleasures that motivate other debased Xenos races. They are dedicated solely and single-mindedly to their own ravenous survival, their endless propagation, and their remorseless evolutionary advancement. They do not travel as a fleet of iron and ceramite, but rather as a single, monstrous superorganism that dressed through the cold void of the cosmos within colossal Hive fleets comprised entirely of living, biomechanical vessels, moving with a terrible unfeeling synchronization as they systematically strip away the flesh, flora, oceans, even the very atmosphere, for every world they encounter, to fuel their own endless reproduction. This coordination is achieved through a, one hates to use the term, marvel of Xenos biology, where every single Tyranid organism is inherently synaptic and psychically reactive, functioning not only as an individual, but rather as a single spark of consciousness within a vast communal hive mind that unites trillions of disparate beasts across the stars. This psychic collective allows the swarm to communicate and organise instantaneously on a scale that defines the practical comprehension of even our most grandest Lord Generals, ensuring that whether a beast is a towering behemoth or a crawling parasite, it moves with the singular will of a single being that desires nothing more than to drown our galaxy in a sea of teeth and chitin. Yet not every creature within this guessed-out hive mind descends into a mindless animal when removed from its collective. Those are the Corporaptor or hominis strain, or Genestealers, are designed to have a vicious intellect and survival instincts when separated. They are primarily a vanguard organism of the Tyranid superorganism, engineered by the malice of the hive mind to act as a perfect form of scouts, infiltrator, and saboteur, sent decades ahead of the main invasion fleets to hide within the underbellies of our greatest starships and most populated worlds, waiting in patient, deadly silence to sow the seeds of our ultimate consumption in the form of the Genestealer Cults. These cults are born from the agile, multi-limbed horrors of the vanguard organism that travel across the void by exploiting every conceivable vulnerability in humanity's star-spanning infrastructure, showing a literal inhuman patience and cunning, secreting themselves away in the dark recesses of cargo bays, batching their closeness bodies onto the outer hulls of massive macro-haulers, or hiding among the disparate throngs of unsuspecting refugees and pilgrim vessels that crisscross the Emperor's domain. Yet their most insidious method of transit remains the exploitation of space hulks, those castle-floating graveyards of fused starships and warp-crossed debris that drift blindly through the tides of the Imperium, acting as a perfect sonic vector that transports the Xenos contagion across the vast reaches of the galaxy, and in some truly harrowing instances, across the very boundaries of time itself. It is a terrifying secret known only to a few mad chronomancers and the most radicalized of the Inquisition that the warp-fickle's currents occasionally spit forth space hulks which in time are revealed to have originated far from the future, containing within their twisted metal autonomies the holds of Imperial vessels that have not yet been laid down in the orbital shipyards of Mars, or even the tragic ossified remains of Space Marines' purge teams, long into chapters that have not yet been founded, or conversely those who have long since been scrubbed from the history as treacherous heretics. Other hulks drift out of the forgotten epochs of the deep past, housing the husks of vessels so ancient and alien in design that no record of their classification, construction or origin survives within the grandest databases of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Yet regardless of whether these massive debris fields hail from the dark tomorrow or the dead yesteryear, the Genestealer vanguard slumbers patiently within them, entirely unaffected by the chronological madness that birthed their transport. As a consequence of these temporal anomalies, those few scholars who possess the rare patience, the clearance, and the morbid fortitude to delve into the labyrinthian histories of our Imperium can begin to trace certain recurring anomalies and bizarre societal collapses that, at the time of their recording, defied all rational explanation by the local Imperial sector commanders. Now, however, burdened as we are with the grim clarity of hindsight, these historical trends reveal a truth that threatens to unseat the sanity of any loyal Imperial citizen. These clawed harbingers of the apocalypse have been festering within the bowels of our realm for far longer than our proud lords cared to admit, walking our streets and corrupting our bloodlines centuries before the first Hive fleet was ever sighted by our long-range augurs. For before the gargantuan living leviathans of the Hive fleets darkened the skies over Tyran, the first official contact with the Tyranids, and are named as such, the first heralds of this galactic apex predator was already working in the dark corners of the Emperor's domain, their true nature long obscured by the heavy-handed reductionism so commonplace within the Ivnu stratum, and confusing matters further as the localized legends, planetary folklore, and the terrified campfire tales of superstitious frontline worlders, meaning all mention of the Genestealers and their growing cults were obscured from any who were even bothering to look for such occurrences in the first place. On feral backwaters of the Outer Rim, by the light of the Astronomicon shines dim, the superstitious populace for millennia had been whispering fearful warnings of the snatchered devils that dragged screaming colonists into the tactless wilderness, while subterranean miners of death worlds pray to the saints for deliverance from the so-called cave nightmares that haunt the absolute black of the deep Promethean veins. Yet it is not merely through the arrival of infested vessels that this blight takes root. For the Ordo Xenos investigators currently sifting through the charred skeleton of my scriptorum are poised a theory far more localized and far more relevant to my immediate future. My world is no stranger to the hunger of the shadows in the warp, having been subjected centuries ago to the full devastating fury of Tyranid invasion by the splinter tendril of Hive Fleet Leviathan. It was only repelled by the truly catastrophic costs of human life and saved from the brink of total digestion by the iron-willed intervention of the Space Marines of the Blood Ravens chapter. While the main Hive vessels were shattered in the upper atmosphere and the world was officially declared purged, it has long been an accepted uneasy truth among our leadership that disconnected feral remnants of the swarm still scurry around the Kutzik ash wastes and the lawless outskirts of the outer hives. These that are now being actively hunted and crushed beneath the tread of the armoured knights of House Varlock. However, we have been blind to the true nature of the survival of the Xenos. For while the Knights of Varlock focused their righteous cannons upon the visible monsters that roam the wilderness, the Order investigators now believe that the defeated Hive mind left behind a far more sinister legacy than mere feral beasts. It appears certain now that amidst the chaos of that ancient defeat, a single Genestealer managed to slip away silently from the battlefields. Evading both the gene scanners of the Astartes and the heavy auger deployed by the Magi biologists of the cult Mechanicus, the creature buried itself deep within the subterranean darkness of our very foundations. For hundreds of standard years, while we sang praises to the Emperor for our deliverance, this solitary survivor has been working tirelessly in the damp, crowded underbellies of our world, weaving its silent web of genetic corruption and birthing the very cults that has now reached into my high scriptorum to burn the evidence of their own existence. If any an unfortunate soul was to actually look upon a Genestealer, it would be to behold a heretical masterpiece of predatory bioengineering, a creature whose very form is sculpted for the singular purpose of slaughter and genetic desecration. It is armoured in a dense, chitinous carapace that can be of a myriad of various oil-stained colours depending on its lineage. A natural plate that can turn away a standard-issued las bolt or the frantic blade of a Hive enforcer, or remaining entirely silent as the beast slinks through the shallows of a hab vent or a rusted drainage pipe that, for a creature of such size, should be impossible to traverse. Unlike the quadrupedal beasts of the greater swarm, this vanguard organism possesses 6 limbs of devastating utility. Its lower legs are built with the coiled, explosive musculature of a leaping apex predator, while its upper pairs terminate in 2 sets of horrifically distinct humanoid hands, the foremost of which are tipped with elongated diamond-hard scythe talons capable of showing through the thickest ceramite boarding shields or tearing open a reinforced plasteel bolt door as if it was mere parchment. Yet, It is not merely the creature's formidable lethality that marks it as the most insidious foe of mankind, but rather the sacrilegious nature of its alien physiology. Its elongated bulbous skull with its distinct rigid forehead houses a highly developed brain cluster that burns with a detached predatory intelligence. Its lidless eyes glow with a sinister, hypnotic spite that can paralyze the victim with sheer terror before a single blow is struck. Beneath its neural fanged maw, however, lies the true instrument of our world's undoing. An elongated, muscular ovipositor designed to pierce human flesh and inject a microscopic viral strain of the Xenos' own genetic material. A subtle, psychic venom that does not kill the host, but rather subverts their mind, rewriting their productive lineage and binding their soul forever to the silent waiting will of the Hive mind. The mechanism by which these vanguard abominations multiply across the stars is a foul perversion of the sacred laws of nature, for the Genestealer possesses no true gender and requires no mate of its own kind to propagate his lineage, seeking out instead the intelligent stock of other sentient races, most commonly the baseline human, that populates the Emperor's Hive worlds. Though the Holy Inquisition harbours grim theories that even the ancient Eldari, or the brutest orcs, can be subverted by their flesh-born rot, however, are avoided as hosts, unless the Genestealer is considered desperate. With both Eldari and the Greenskins being of a curated nature, it seems they are in various ways less effective as hosts. York possesses its instinctual Gestalt psychic awareness that purges the altered, un-orky orc from their clan, thus preventing the infected fungal spores from propagating in any significant numbers. And the Eldari, who ought to have a baseline attunement to the warp and hypersensitivity to emotion, can detect any abnormalities within their kind, and will mercilessly purge it to protect their craft or exodite world. It is also noted by our own biologists that they also reproduce far too slowly for a cult's rapid proliferation. Even the Tau, with their subservient connection to the ethereals, make them far less of an enticing host to birth a brood of blue-skinned hybrids. Thus, humanity's fragile mind and malleable genome render us the Predator's ultimate vessel for their desecration. Upon selecting a suitable host, the Genestealer ensnares its first victim's gaze, utilising the aforementioned low-level psychic glamour emitted from its lidless eyes to reduce the unfortunate soul to a state of passivity, before deploying its long whip-like tongue to thrust deeply into the flesh of the host and deposit his alien DNA. Within a few solar hours of the utter violation, the infected thrall awakens from this encounter with no physical wounds to mark the defilement and utterly stripped of any memory of the incident, returning to their ordinary life within the Hive or the Manufactorum, where their devotion to the Imperium is subtly replaced by an invisible, unbreaking psychic fealty to the Xenos that infected it. This terrible certainty, this singular fact alone, stand as the crowning reason why the existence of the Genestealer cult is so utterly soul-chilling to comprehend. This creeping genetic defilement recognises no boundaries of faith, allegiances or station, possessing the capacity to claim anyone, from the most fiercely loyal Imperial citizen to the most decadent traitor, and striking down individuals of any rank or position within the vast hierarchy of the Emperor's realm. To succumb to the ever-corrupted nature of the warp, to bargain away one's immortal soul to the dark gods for the false promise of temporal power or forbidden knowledge, is an act of undeniable blackest heresy. Yet it remains fundamentally a choice born of a flawed human mind, able to tragically exercise its own free will in the deliberate betrayal of the Imperium. In terrifying contrast, there is absolutely no choice, no agency, and no spark of free will to be found in the subversive horror of the Genestealer's kiss. Violently overrides the victim's sacred genetic architecture against their violation and hollows out their devotion to the Golden Throne, transforming an otherwise blameless servant of mankind into an unwitting biological puppet that will actively breed the very instruments of its own species' annihilation while remaining pitifully, horrifically unaware of its own damnation. Those infected, and all those of their line forevermore, will be held in the thrall of the Genestealer's Broodmind. A localised hive-minded miniature that holds sway over all those with the DNA of the original Genestealer, henceforth known as the Patriarch. Once returned to the crowded, soot-choked confines of their respective societies, these hollowed-out vessels, known to the Holy Ordos as the Contagii, are immediately gripped by an unnatural, all-consuming biological imperative that masquerades as the simple, domestic desire to seek out companionship and establish a family. This seemingly innocent longing is merely the cold instinct of the Xenos puppet master pulling at their strings, driving the infected host to find a mate who, through the very act of physical union, is likewise contaminated by the viral Genestealer DNA, thus sealing the doom of another innocent soul and ensuring that the profound seed is planted within the planetary populace. The legions of forever tainted baseline puppets are organised into the ranks of the Brood Brothers, a term used for the group of baseline humans who have been infected with the Primarch's kiss directly or by a human sexual transmission or even blood infusion. With other members of this blasphemous brotherhood having infiltrated Medicaid stations and blood banks, and even into food production facilities such as the corpse starch canneries or algae farms, to contaminate the supply with their tainted genetics. It would take a stringent review of a Compagii to reveal its true nature, as they maintain the physical and metabolic profile that remains deceptively identical to the baseline members of their original species, betraying their inner rot only through a subtle, barely perceivable hue matching that of their patriarch that creeps across their skin like a bruise under the flickering lumen lights of the Hive. This renders them the most undetectable infiltrators imaginable within the crowded sectors of the Imperium. Yet their outward autonomy is a complete illusion, for their minds are entirely bound to the psychic will of the ancient patriarch who first infected them, allowing this monstrous progenitor to seize total control of their faculties through the suffocating silent web of the Broodmind, and reduce them to utterly compliant mindless slaves and breeding stock. The unnatural union between those now under the control of the Genestealer will not yield a pure-blooded child of the Imperium, but rather a mutated hybrid that blends the features of the host with the terrible taints of the predator. And infected parents will not recoil in horror when seeing their offspring, nor do they do what any righteous imperial system would do and purge the twisted abomination from existence. Instead, they gaze upon the mishappen infant with an overwhelming, tearful adoration, viewing the clawed thing as an absolute flawless, perfect being that any parent would be proud of. The Tyraniid DNA trapping them in the Broodmind, and thus even the very perception of reality is mutated, forcing them to see beauty where there is only corruption. The immediate first and second generations born of this union, the Melegancy and hybrids respectively, are heavily deformed, wretched creatures, possessing multiple chitinous arms, hunched bulbous backs, and have a complete lack of human speech that forces them to remain hidden to prevent any wandering eyes to discover their newly formed nest of genetic defilement. As the alien bloodlines continue to interbreed with the local populace, the third and fourth generations, true hybrids and primacy, begin to assume a more deceptive bipedal form mirroring the original infected human Contagii in their line. These late-stage hybrids are capable of passing for ordinary imperial citizens upon a cursory inspection, though closer scrutiny will always betray their tainted lineage by revealing the sickly tint of their patriarch's colouring along their paled flesh, with sharp, needle-like teeth being concealed behind forced smiles. It is stated in the records that they possess a unsettling predatory stillness in their behaviour. The final culmination of this silent infiltration occurs when the fourth-generation hybrids reproduce, for the dormant Xenos genome asserts itself with absolute terrifying dominance, causing the subverted human mother to give birth to not another hybrid, but to a flawless, ravenous, pure-strain Genestealer that is identical in every biological aspect to the ancient ancestor that first infected the lineage 5 generations prior. These pure strains will be sent away, smuggled off-world in cargo haulers, or if the world is populous enough, to another hive to repeat the breeding cycle and create a sect loyal to the original patriarch. If any of these options are denied to them, they will remain within the cult as shock troops and guardians of the various holdouts and layers. But by this time, the patriarch will have an army at their disposal. Through this creeping multi-generational curse and the steady supply of Bayfan humans being subjugated by the many forms of infection, an entire planetary populace can be hollowed out from within, transformed into a fanatical subterranean cult that worships the very monsters sent to consume them. As mentioned previously in this record, it is perhaps the most bitter and damning realization of all, that our very survival mechanism, the deep-seated and by now well-ingrained psychological need to seek out a higher authority to worship, is precisely what renders humanity the most tragically ideal host for the Genestealer's design. If but a single ordained priest of the lower sub-spire shrines should receive the foul kiss of the vanguard beast, the holy machinery of the Imperial Creed is instantly subverted from within, transforming the very sacraments meant to protect our souls into a highly efficient vector of genetic damnation. Under the guise of standard devotion, the sacred architecture of the local parish begins to warp, with the stone icons of the saints quietly replaced with effigies that look deceptively pious under the dim candlelight, but on closer examination will have one too many arms or the rigid brow, while the wording of the daily sermons is subtly altered by the clergy to praise a distorted, four-armed emperor. The unsuspecting faithful, crying out for salvation from the grueling miseries of their hive labour, are thus led blindly by their own devotion straight into the waiting, predatory arms of the cult. Their genuine faith reprimized against them until they are transformed into a massive, unquestioning workforce of contagii, providing an endless supply of fresh genetic stock to breed yet more hybrids and expand its reach. As the creeping infection advances ever further into the upper echelons of the planetary hierarchy, worming its way through the labyrinthian corridors of state power, the cultists begin to secure highly influential positions as administratum scribes, logis clerks, and divisio munitorum adepts. Once embedded within these vital civil organs, their hidden subversives grow increasingly bold in the messes of procurement, utilising their claimants' keys and bureaucratic authority to bloodlessly redirect the immense resources of the Imperium away from the frontline war zones and into the awaiting hands of their subterranean brotherhood. Through this simple, malicious stroke of a quill, or a subtly altered data's late entry, entire crate of pristine las rifles, heavy stubber ammunition, or high-capacity power packs will be officially declared as lost in the turbulent currents of warp transit, or written off as entirely destroyed due to a warehouse structural failure. In truth, these vital instruments of war are being meticulously sequestered away within secured, cult-controlled railway stations and deep under Hive distribution hubs, hidden from the eyes of the Arborites under layers of falsified shipping manifests and stockpiled in absolute silence, waiting for that prophesied bloody hour when the Patriarch gives the command to rise up and tear down the world with its own stolen steel. As the size of the cult swells into the millions, highly specialized hybrids are birthed to serve the ancient Patriarch. Among these are the Maguses, psychically gifted and highly manipulative individuals who are utterly enthralled to the Patriarch's will, tasked with using their hypnotic influence to subvert and convert key targets within the planetary government and high military command. While the militarized masses of the hybrid cults are organized and led by primuses, hardened generals or ambush specialists responsible for coordinating the complex logistics of the eventual uprising on their prophesied grand day of Ascension. The time when the star gods descend to unite the world in their loving embrace. Yet the cult is acutely aware that they are consistently outnumbered. It is rare for a cult to gain complete control of a world before the High Fleet's arrival or they are discovered. As such, they seek to gain sympathy from the unaffected masses, the desperate sumless billions who toil under the crushing weight of planetary tithes and the unfeeling fists of imperial governance. To turn human empathy into a form of infection, an under-Hive legend is born. A creature dubbed a Calamorph is manufactured, engineered by the Patriarch to exploit the psychology of the mortal mind and to act as a public face of the cult newly formed Hive Gang. This being is spoken of in hushed, reverent whispers as a figure of pure folklore, a romantic revolutionary hero who emerges from the smog to strike back against the uncaring cruelties of the upper spires. To the planetary governors and the enforcers tasked with maintaining the Lex Imperialis, he is a figure of absolute dread, a faithless, hated anarch whose sudden appearance leaves a trail of executed officials and shattered infrastructure in his wake. Across the rusted halls of countless subterranean sub-settlements, and even upon the highly secured walkways of the upper spires, the same defiant graffiti begins to appear as the cult nears its maturity. a crude yet striking silhouette of a cloaked, three-armed figure, wielding a trio of customised, heavy-caliber auto-stub pistols. To the upper spires, this three-armed mutant is the heretic most sacrilegious. But to the lower hives and the downtrodden, the ignored and the isolated, the Calamorth and his Hive gang are an escape from the poverty in which they dwell. The Hive gang welcome any and all into their ranks, and thus another vector of genetic contamination is created. As apparently theorised by many Ordo Xenos members, another reason why the Genestealer prefers humanity as its breeding stock is our aforementioned malleable DNA. When left to its own devices, humanity is capable of producing a wide array of abhumans. Navigators, Ogrims, Bratlings and Felinids are all products of humanity's genome when subjugated to the random paths of evolution. But when we take control of our own DNA, we are capable of creating truly masterful things. The Custodes and the Primarchs, handcrafted by the Emperor himself. The Astartes and the various legions in the later chapters, all having their own specific Genestealer traits. Even the long-lost kin of the Botan are genetically engineered clones of perfect design, so much so that they have survived since before the Age of Strife. So the horrors that can be created when introducing Tyranid DNA are monsters formed at the darkest of nightmares. The Xenospirus occasionally throws forth misshapen outcasts known within the tactical grimoires of Inquisition and Deathwatch as aberrants. Birthed with a severely mutated phenotype that deviates violently from the expected physical form of their respected brood cycle, these hulking brutes are characterised by their asymmetrical musculature, thickened bone structures, and a distinctly inferior animalistic intellect that renders them entirely incapable of speech or complex thought. While a lesser scholar may naively compare such hulks to ogrins, such thought should be instantly excised. For the aberrants are more beast than anything else. Feral and shackled only by the Broodmind's control, what these lumbering giants lack in cognitive ability, they more than compensate for in raw physical power, possessing a supernatural endurance that allows them to shrug off even the heaviest of fire. All while driven by a potent, instinctual imperative to protect other members of their cult. Most notably, these beasts are seen lurking around the biophagus. These specialists act as the chief biomedical scientists and shoguns of the hidden insurrection, corrupted apothecaries specialising in the most perverse forms of forbidden genetic engineering, utilising harvested Tyranid DNA and profound bioalchemy to ensure the survival and rapid proliferation of their hidden brotherhood. Their primary dark mandate is to determine new insidious methods of adapting and distributing the Genestealer's curse, frequently altering the vector of transmission to suit the specific biological vulnerabilities of the host world, ensuring the infection can bypass even the most stringent of purity screenings of the Adeptus Mechanicus. When the conflict inevitably spills from the shadows into the open streets, these scientist surgeons swap their gene-spiting tools for the instruments of active biological warfare, marching into battle alongside their warp creations while carrying heavy chemical swashing injector-vodes. These horrific implements, they can deliver precise hyperadrenalizing doses directly into the flesh of the lumbering aberrants or other favoured cultists, instantly amplifying their physical might and driving them into a state of unstoppable, pain-shrugging frenzy. Whether this slow, cancerous growth takes a handful of solar months or several standard centuries to mature, eventually the cult will reach its zenith and go on the warpath, waiting only for the moment when the Patriarch receives the psychic shadow of the approaching Hive fleet and transmits the psychic order to rise up and drown the planet in blood. When the psychic command is unleashed, the hybrid masses arm themselves with their hoarded military gear and crude mining implements, surging forth from their layers in a massed, fanatic tide that sweeps aside all opposition. Yet the ultimate tragedy of this grand betrayal, the pitch-black irony that no member of the subverted populace, not even the most psychically gifted magus, is capable of comprehending until the final moments, is that this long-awaited bay of Ascension, to which they have so blindly dedicated their lives and souls for, is nothing more than a beautifully orchestrated slaughterhouse. In the initial hours of the cataclysm, as the skies darken and the suffocating psychic shadow of the prophesied Hive fleet and the biomechanical leviathans descend through the burning atmosphere to claim every drop of organic matter, the cruel illusion of brotherhood is maintained. The towering swarm recognises the shared genetic signature within the veins of the cultists, and synaptic constructions are broadcast to the chattering beasts to let the hybrids live, prompting the fanatical brood to fight profoundly alongside the towering Xenos monstrosities, executing flawless acts of sabotage behind our rapidly diminishing defensive lines and sharing the downfall of the Emperor's walls. This comradeship is appalling to behold, yet it is fleeting by design. The true horror unfolds the exact moment the planetary patriarch, the ancient bloated progenitor of the entire cult, is brought into physical contact with its starborn kin and is instantly reintegrated into the grand overriding hive mind of the fleet. This total reabsorption instantly and violently severs the localized psychic Broodmind that has bound the cult together for generations. In that single shattering microsecond of silence, the psychic veil is ripped away from the minds of the millions of hybrids, forcing them to awaken in the raw, unvarnished truth of their existence, just as the beasts they considered their saviors turn upon them with snapping jaws and clicking mandibles. Before they can even scream, let alone raise their strong weapons in defense, the fanatical cultists are ruthlessly slaughtered and swept into the ravenous feeding pools alongside the loyalists they so viciously betrayed. They are granted their ultimate final prayer, to become one with the starborn gods, though not in the glorious spiritual ascension they had anticipated, but rather as a screening, dissolving slurry of genetic soup, reduced to the raw biomass that feeds the endless hunger of the Tyranids. In a manner that mirrors their reoccurring ordeal of their own reproductive biology, the macro-scale behaviour of the cult itself forms a closed, inescapable loop of planetary destruction that ensures the Xenos plague can never truly be eradicated by ordinary means. Even as the conquered world is actively being stripped down to its bound bedrock, transformed into a lifeless monument to the hive mind's hunger, the cycle is already engineering its own continuation before the final fires had even died out. Hidden deep within the damp, forgotten holds of the retreating Navis Imperialis warships that managed to break through the orbital blockade, or stowed away amidst the frantic screening refugees fleeing the dying system, a solitary Purestrain Genestealer will always manage to slip away into the uncaring void. This lone harbinger will ride the trade lanes until it finds a fresh, unsuspecting world in some distant sector that believes itself entirely safe from the horrors of the swarm. There in the dark corners of a new Hive city or agri-world, or other Xenos colony, not yet purged by bolter and blade, the beast will find its first victim and begin the slow, multi-generational defilement anew, seeing a fresh cult that will grow unnoticed beneath the foundations of society, bound in invisible chains of psychic fealty to the newly ascended patriarch, and waiting with blind fanatical patience for their own inevitable day of ascension. Thus, as I cast my weary eyes once more across the smouldering ash-choked expanse of my room in Scriptorum, watching the grey snow of charred knowledge slowly settle over the shattered stone, the horrific tapestry of the Genestealer cult stands fully revealed in all its calculated hunger. It does raise a haunting question. Is it our day of ascension that is close to hand? Did the cult attack knowing full well that a hide is close? I pray to he who sits upon the Golden Throne, but that is not the case. Let this chronicle serve as a stern shield against the encroaching dark, no matter what degenerate form they may take. For our enemies do not merely scratch at the outer gates, but fester silently within our very walls. Waiting for the hour, we lower our vigil, and so we must stand ever ready. Remember, as always, knowledge is power. Guard it well. And so this record may now be sealed in the Emperor's name. To appease the algorithmic machine spirit and ensure it recognizes your service, register your credentials or preferred seal in the comments below. Your feedback and support is genuinely appreciated. I would like to extend my never-ending gratitude to my Patreon subscribers, a sentence I never would have thought I would ever get to say. To join those most noble Master Scholars, visit patreon.com/Historitor Corbe Moore to keep this transmission array running and the sacred vellum fresh. Or you can join me on Twitter or TikTok at @MoreCorvo. The links, as ever, are in the details below. But our work never ends. Your clearance has been extended to the next prioritised file appearing on your boxcast now. Proceed onwards, dearest listener, for our vigil continues I shall join you in the next one.